In a quiet village nestled at the edge of an enchanted forest, where the chimneys curled smoke into the sky like sleepy sighs, and every cobblestone hummed with old magic, lived a young cake seller named Mira. Her bakery, lovingly named the Whispering Oven, sat in the heart of the square with its blue shutters, flowering window boxes, and an ever-present line of customers, some on 2 legs, and others on 4, winged, or even slithering. Mira was unlike anyone else in the village. She had been born with a gift, one whispered about but never quite understood by others. She could speak with animals. From the time she was a child, Mira had known the thoughts of the sparrows perched on her windowsill, the worries of the hedgehogs in the grass, and the jokes of squirrels that leapt from tree to tree. As she grew, so did her gift, and she used it not just to understand the forest creatures, but to make her bakery a place of quiet miracles. Each morning before sunrise, the birds would bring her ripe berries from the woods, the rabbits would knead dough with their tiny paws, and the badgers, serious, noble beasts, helped deliver baked goods to elderly villagers too frail to make the journey. Her companion and closest friend was a sleek black cat named Lucio, who wore a golden bell and a sarcastic sense of humor. Lucio didn't just talk, he advised, critiqued, and sometimes downright scolded Mira when she gave away too many honey cakes or stayed up too late experimenting with rosewater custards. Yet beneath the sass, he adored her fiercely. Mira was kind to everyone, animal, human or otherwise, and kindness, Lucio believed, was the rarest magic of all. Though she lived surrounded by warmth and gratitude, Mira sometimes felt a quiet ache settle in her chest at night. As she curled beside Lucio with a cup of chamomile and a pastry of her own making, she would stare out the window toward the forest's edge. It wasn't a longing for riches or grandeur. It was something deeper, something simpler, a desire for connection, for someone who saw the world not as something to conquer, but to cherish. Someone who would understand why she left pieces of cake in tree hollows for the old owl who'd lost her mate, or why she cried when a beetle's wing was torn. Mira longed for a soul that matched her own. One misty morning, while gathering dandelion petals with the mice near the creek, Mira spoke aloud what she had long kept inside. "If there's someone out there who hears the world like I do," she whispered, "I hope they find their way to me." The forest rustled in reply, though no creature answered. But somewhere deep within those ancient woods, something stirred. Back at the bakery, Mira prepared for the day. The oven roared with gentle flames, and trays of almond tarts, sugared chestnut puffs, and blackberry crumbles lined the counters. Customers arrived in joyful clusters, children pressed their noses to the glass, and blue jays chirped gossip from the awning. As noon rolled around and the last loaf of cinnamon bread was sold, Mira took a seat by the window with Lucio. "You're dreaming again," Lucio said, culling into her lap. She stroked his fur absently. "Maybe. But is it so wrong to believe something wonderful might come walking into your life one day?" Lucio flicked his tail. "Depends. Are they walking on 2 legs or 4? She laughed, but her eyes stayed on the forest. That evening, as clouds gathered and rain pattered softly on the rooftops, Mira stayed late in the kitchen, preparing a special pie. It was blueberry with thyme and honeyed crust, a recipe she hadn't made in years, one her grandmother had once said could soothe even the most sorrowful soul. She didn't know why she baked it, only that something inside her said someone might need it, and someone did. As the rain fell harder and the lamps glowed low, a figure staggered through the trees just beyond the bakery. Mud clung to russet fur. Eyes once proud were dim with pain. Prince Lion, now cursed into the form of a fox, collapsed outside Mira's door. He had wandered for weeks, searching for help, for hope, for anything. Mira heard the faintest scratch at the door. She opened it and gasped at the soaked, shivering creature. Without hesitation, she scooped him into her arms, carried him inside, and set him gently by the fire. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured. "You must be starving." Lucio raised an eyebrow. "This one's different." Mira nodded. "I can feel it." She spoke to the fox as if he were human, brushing tangles from his fur and offering him a small plate of the blueberry pie. He looked up at her with eyes so haunted, so intelligent, that something inside her fluttered. That night, as thunder rolled and lightning flashed across the sky, Mira sang softly to her new companion. Lucio sat watchful beside them, his tail curled neatly around his paws. And somewhere beneath the storm's cry and the oven's hum, a bond began to bloom. Mira didn't know the fox was a prince. But she knew, as surely as she knew how to speak the language of robins and deer, that her life was about to change forever. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It came down in thick, silvery sheets that turned the cobblestone roads into slippery ribbons and soaked the branches of the forest until they bowed low. Mira barely left the bakery, not because business was slow, though it was, but because her heart stayed tethered to the fox curled in the basket beside the hearth. His russet fur was drying out now, glossy and soft, and his wound, an ugly gash across his flank, had begun to heal under her gentle care. She had named him none, not yet. It didn't feel right. There was something about him that asked for more than a name. He wasn't like the others. He didn't chatter like the squirrels, didn't nudge playfully like the badgers. He watched her with eyes that seemed almost human, tired, knowing, curious. As if he had seen too much and still chosen to trust her. Lucio, predictably, wasn't thrilled. He kept his distance and made frequent, melodramatic comments about fleas and betrayal. Letting a fox sleep in the bakery, he muttered one morning from atop the windowsill, flicking his tail. Next thing you know, we'll have wolves running the register. Mira only smiled, wiping flour from her apron as she placed a tray of honey-dusted almond buns into the oven. He's not like other foxes, Lucio. Lucio narrowed his eyes. Exactly what I'm worried about. Still, he didn't leave. In fact, he watched closely. He saw how Mira knelt to speak softly to the fox each night, recounting her day, her thoughts, her secret fears. How she giggled when the fox helped nudge a mixing bowl toward her with his paw. How she absent-mindedly stroked behind his ears while reading poetry aloud. And the fox, he listened. Every word. Every sigh. Prince Lion, trapped in fur and silence, had never imagined kindness like this. Not in court, where every smile came with strings. Not in the world beyond the gates, where cruelty was currency. But Mira. She gave without question. She didn't ask who he was or where he came from. She didn't expect answers. She simply welcomed him, scuzz and all. Sometimes, when the bakery quieted and the fire dimmed, a lion would curl beside Mira's chair and close his eyes, letting her voice wash over him like the lullaby of a safer life. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything, to thank her, to ask her why she was so gentle when the world was so sharp, but the curse held his voice in chains. One night, Mira sat at her work table sketching a new cake design, humming to herself, when the fox patted up and gently nudged her hand. "What is it, sweet one?" she asked. He looked at the parchment. Then at her. Then, slowly, carefully, he dipped his paw in a bit of flour and made a soft mark next to a rose she had drawn. She blinked. "You like this one? The rose petal cream?" she asked. He wagged his tail once. Mira grinned. "I knew you had good taste." Elian's heart thudded hard in his chest. It was something close to joy. Something he hadn't felt since before the curse, before duty became a cage and kindness a weakness. That evening, Mira looked out the window as lightning flickered faintly across the horizon. "Do you think," she whispered to Lucio, "that some souls are born into the wrong skin?" Lucio, to his credit, didn't scoff. He only said, "Some souls wear many skins before they're seen for who they really are." The next morning, the sun finally broke through the clouds. The entire village seemed to sparkle, rain-washed and golden. Mira stepped outside with the fox at her heels, breathing in the clean scent of damp earth and blooming lilacs. Children ran by, laughing, and one little girl paused when she saw the fox. "Miss Mira," she said, "is he yours?" Mira knelt and scratched the fox behind the ears. "For now," she said softly. "But I think he has a story to tell." That day, a falcon fell from the sky. It happened just after noon. Mira heard a crash in the garden behind the bakery and ran outside to find the magnificent bird tangled in branches, its wing bloodied and feathers in disarray. Without hesitation, she cradled it gently and brought it inside. Lucio eyed the bird warily. "Now we're running a sanctuary." The fox approached the falcon carefully, sniffing the edge of its tail feathers. The bird opened one sharp eye, and something passed between them. Mira watched as the falcon's gaze shifted from the fox to her. "You were kind," the falcon rasped. "Kindness always finds the cursed." Mira dropped the bandage in her hand. "You can talk?" "I am a messenger," the falcon said, "and a witness. This fox you protect is no ordinary creature. He is Prince Elian of Veilbright, cursed by dark magic for refusing to marry for power. Only a heart that gives freely without demand can return him to himself." Mira stared at the fox, her chest tight with wonder and disbelief. She had known. Somewhere in her soul, she had known. Lucio, for once, had nothing to say. I don't understand," Mira whispered. "Why me?" The falcon folded its wing gently. "Because you saw him. Not the fur. Not the silence. You saw the soul." The fox looked up at her, eyes wide and shining. And Mira did the only thing her heart could fathom. She knelt and took his face in her hands, pressing her forehead gently to his. "You don't have to be a prince," she murmured. "You just have to be you." And from somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the scent of roses, and something old and powerful began to stir. The days that followed were unlike anything Mira had ever experienced. The secret she now carried, that the fox with the gentle eyes and cautious steps was a prince, settled in her chest like a warm ember. Not heavy, not burdensome, but sacred. She told no one, not even the children who asked daily if the fox would be joining her in the bakery garden for his usual afternoon nap. Life at the Whispering Oven took on a quiet urgency. Mira moved through each moment with greater care, greater reverence. She baked with deeper intention, adding cardamom to the almond pastries because Elian once nudged the jar closer with his nose, and extra cinnamon to the honey cakes because his tail wagged every time she stirred the batter. She spoke to him more, sometimes forgetting he couldn't respond in words. But his eyes said everything. They laughed, they comforted, they listened. In the late hours after the bakery closed, she and Lucio and Elian would sit on the back porch under the lantern glow, watching fireflies dance through the garden. Lucio, now cautiously tolerant of the prince-turned-fox, occasionally sat near him with deliberate disinterest. "You could have told us sooner," Lucio muttered one night, cleaning his paw. "Would have made the theatrics more bearable." Elian's ears twitched, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Mira giggled, brushing flour from her apron. "Maybe he didn't know how. I still think he's a bit smug," the cat added. "But brave," Mira said softly, her voice catching. "And kind. And good." The garden fell into comfortable silence. But peace is never left untouched in stories like this. One morning, a hush fell over the village. It came not with thunder or fire, but with shadows that moved without wind and silence that curled unnaturally through the trees. The animals felt it first. The sparrows stopped singing. The bees vanished. Even the stubborn garden frogs burrowed deep into the earth. Mira noticed it in the way the bread didn't rise the same, how the dough seemed reluctant to form. The warmth in the oven flickered strangely, as though the fire itself was uncertain. Then she heard it, a sharp knock at the door, too precise, too cold. She opened it to find a woman cloaked in midnight blue. Her face was ageless, her eyes black and glassy as obsidian. At her side, a serpent coiled lazily, its tongue flicking in and out. "You are Mira," the woman said, her voice smooth as frost. Mira stood tall, apron dusted in flour. "I am. May I help you?" "You already have," the woman said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've been sheltering a creature not yours to keep, a prince that belongs to the crown and to me." Mira's heart clenched. "You must be Lady Noctra." The sorceress bowed slightly. "A title I wear proudly. And you, little baker, have meddled in magic beyond your station." Lucio hissed, fur bristling. Elian padded to Mira's side, hackles raised, teeth bared. "You've no right," Mira said, voice trembling but firm. "He came to me wounded. I helped. That's not meddling. That's compassion." Noctra's smile vanished. "Compassion is for the weak. You've interfered with fate. And for that, your sweet little world will rot." She raised a hand, dark energy crackling in her palm. Before she could strike, a chorus of animal cries echoed through the village. From the woods and skies they came: hawks, squirrels, foxes, deer. A bear lumbered into the square, bees buzzing defiantly around his head. The creatures of the forest stood between Mira and the sorceress, a living wall of wild protection. Mira stepped forward. "You don't have to be this," she said to Noctra. "You don't have to hurt to prove your power." The sorceress sneered. "Don't patronize me with oven wisdom." But Mira's voice only grew stronger. "Stay for tea. Let me bake you something. Just once. Let kindness be your spell." Noctra blinked, stunned. The wind stilled. "I've defeated armies," she whispered. "I've fed hundreds," Mira replied. "And I still have sugar to spare." Noctra looked at the animals, at the fox at Mira's feet, at the girl who stood against her not with weapons, but warmth. For a moment, something flickered in the sorceress's expression, a shadow of the girl she might have been long ago. "I'll return," Noctra said finally, and vanished into smoke. Mira stood frozen. Elan pressed his nose to her palm. She sank to her knees and wrapped her arms around him. Lucio hopped onto her shoulder. "You invited a death wish for cake." "You're mad. She's lonely," Mira whispered. Even darkness remembers the taste of light. And in the stillness that followed, Mira understood. The curse could only be broken by true kindness freely given, not just to a lion, but to the world that had forgotten how to care. So she baked. She baked lavender shortbread laced with moonflower. She baked honey tarts that sang of spring. She baked a cake of sweet chestnut, rosemary, and golden sugar. And when she set it in the window, she said softly, "This one is for you, Lady Noctra. Come back when you're ready." Days passed, and though Lady Noctra had vanished, the air around the village remained heavy, as if her shadow lingered behind every whisper of wind. Mira kept baking, perhaps more than ever. The scent of lemon balm and wild plum drifted through the streets each morning, warm and defiant. Her pastries were a promise that even in the face of curses and cruelty, sweetness would endure. A lion stayed close to her side, ever watchful. Though he could not speak, his presence brought Mira a deep, quiet courage. She often found him outside the bakery at dawn, looking toward the forest with his tail still and his eyes full of memory. Lucio, meanwhile, had become a sentry of sorts, guarding the windowsill with all the suspicion of a cat who had survived centuries of bad decisions made by humans. Mira didn't know if Noctra would return. But in her heart, she believed she would. The woman's fury had been sharp, but it hadn't pierced Mira. It had recoiled against something unmovable inside her. That strength, she realized, wasn't her gift with animals. It wasn't even her magic. It was her kindness. And so, she prepared. She wove protective wreaths of lavender and hawthorn and hung them in the bakery's corners. She read through old recipe books her grandmother had hidden behind jars of juniper berries. One of them, bound in cracked leather and faded gold ink, held a recipe that shimmered faintly on the page. A compassion cake, meant to mend even the most broken hearts. The ingredients were unusual: dew gathered under a full moon, honey from bees who'd never stung, and a single tear shed for someone else's sorrow. Mira had most of what she needed. The rest, she waited for. Then, one evening, as the sky blushed violet and lanterns flickered to life, Noctra returned. She appeared not in smoke or lightning, but in silence, standing in the garden behind the bakery. The serpent was gone. Her cloak was thinner now, its edge frayed. And in her hands, she held nothing but the air. Mira met her there, holding a small parcel wrapped in linen. "You came," Mira said softly. Noctra's voice had lost its frost. "No one has ever waited for me." "Not really." Mira stepped closer. "I made you something." She unwrapped the parcel and revealed a small, delicate cake. Its icing shimmered faintly with lavender cream and rosewater glaze. Inside was honeyed fig, cinnamon, and crushed violet sugar. "What magic is this?" she asked. "Not magic," Mira replied. "Memory. Of sweetness. Of being cared for." The sorceress took the cake. Her hands trembled. "Why do you offer this to me?" "Because I see you," Mira said. "Not the curses. Not the shadows. Just you." For a long moment, there was only the sound of crickets and wind. Then Noctra sank to the garden bench and took a bite. Her eyes widened. Some long-buried ache, broke free. "I was kind once," she whispered. "A long time ago." "I know," Mira said. "Kindness never really leaves. It just waits." From within the bakery, a lion watched, tail still, ears perked. He felt it then, the curse tethering him, weakening, loosening like vines uncoiling from his soul. Noctra wiped a tear from her cheek. The curse, it wasn't just for him. It was for all who believed the world no longer had space for softness. "I cursed what I feared I'd never find again." Mira knelt beside her. "You found it now, if you want it." The sorceress looked at her with hollowed grace. "And what of you, Mira of the Whispering Oven? What do you want?" Mira glanced toward a lion. "Just a chance," she said. "To see someone whole again." Noctra stood slowly. The air shimmered faintly around her, not with darkness, but with release. "Then you shall have it." She stepped into the moonlight and raised a hand, palm glowing pale gold. A soft hum filled the garden as the light spread, wrapping a lion in warmth. He didn't struggle, only closed his eyes. Then, slowly, the shape began to shift. Fur became skin. Paws lengthened into hands. A cloak of gold and ash appeared around broad shoulders. And in the place where the fox had stood now knelt a man, tall, beautiful, and humbled by the love that had found him. A lion looked up, eyes still fox gold, and whispered, "Mira." She ran to him, and he caught her as though she had always belonged in his arms. Noctra turned to leave, but Mira stopped her. "You can stay." Noctra smiled, just barely. "I think it's time I remembered how." That night, as stars bloomed above the village, Mira lit every lantern in the bakery. The oven glowed. The air danced with sugar and possibility. And in the garden, 3 figures sat beneath the moon, a prince reborn, a baker made of hope, and a sorceress remembering the taste of light. The morning after the spell lifted, the entire village awoke to whispers, not of fear, but of wonder. Word had spread through birdcall and breeze. The fox was a prince. And not just any prince, a lion of Valebright, long thought missing, now returned by a baker's grace and a kiss of kindness. Mira and a lion stood at the doorstep of the Whispering Oven, bathed in golden light as the first rays of dawn caught the dew along the rooftop. Ilian's cloak fluttered lightly in the breeze, but it was his expression that shone brighter, a mix of awe, humility, and overwhelming affection for the woman beside him. He turned to her, his voice warm but unsteady, as if it hadn't been used in years. "You believed in me when I couldn't speak, when I couldn't be anything but a shadow. That broke the curse, but it also gave me back my heart." Mira looked up at him, eyes soft, voice quiet. "You were never just a shadow to me." Behind them, Lucio sat smugly on the windowsill, tail swishing. "About time someone noticed the magic around here isn't just in the cakes." The days that followed were filled with music, dancing, and a warmth that spread through the village like honey in tea. People from nearby towns arrived in curiosity and celebration. A great feast was held in the square, with Mira at its heart, handing out spice fruit tarts and laughing as children clung to her skirts. A lion, still adjusting to life in human skin, helped carry crates of flour and chop wood, never hiding his identity nor asking for special treatment. To Mira's delight, he preferred the bakery to the palace, the smell of brown sugar over the scent of court perfume. He slept on a cot by the fire, rising early to help shape loaves, humming softly as if the song of the forest still echoed in him. But as joyful as the days were, there was a question that hovered like a butterfly just out of reach. What came next? One evening, as the stars blinked awake and Mira placed the last honeyed biscuit on a cooling rack, a lion reached for her hand. They walked into the garden together, where the herbs perfumed the air and fireflies glowed softly in the hedges. "I want to ask you something," he said, voice laced with nerves. Mira tilted her head. "Go on." He dropped to one knee, not grandly, but with quiet reverence, and opened a small wooden box carved with forest vines. Inside was a ring shaped from rose gold, set with a moonstone that shimmered like twilight. "I know I was a fox when we met. I know I couldn't give you words, or comfort, or certainty. But I can now. So, Mirror of the Whispering Oven, will you marry me? Not as a princess, but as yourself. As the baker who sees the world the way it deserves to be seen." Mira blinked, tears stinging her eyes. "Only if we stay here. Only if we build something that isn't just royal, but real." Alain stood and pulled her into his arms. "Then we'll build it together." Lucio, watching from the trellis, rolled his eyes. "At least make the wedding cake interesting." They decided not to wed in a castle. Instead, the ceremony took place beneath the trees, where birds sang blessings and the wind rustled the leaves in applause. Mira wore a dress stitched by tailors and sparrows alike, and a lion wore a cloak woven from royal velvet and woodland moss. Guests arrived not in gilded carriages but on foot, by boat, or carried by storks. Lady Noctra even returned, dressed not in midnight, but in soft indigo, and brought a gift, a tea that soothed bad dreams and mended forgotten aches. And when Mira and a lion kissed beneath the flowering oaks, the stars flickered like candles in celebration. After the wedding, Mira hung a small sign beneath the Whispering Oven's wooden plaque, "Home of the Prince and the Baker," and beneath that, "All creatures welcome." Together, they baked. Together, they healed. And together, they dreamed not of a perfect kingdom, but a kind one. And in every warm loaf, every lavender tart, and every cup of tea served with a smile, Mira's magic endured, not just in her hands, but in her heart. For in loving without question, she had rewritten more than a curse. She had rewritten fate. Years passed, but the scent of Mira's baking never left the village. The Whispering Oven remained the soul of the town, its doors open to all, its shelves lined with cakes kissed by stardust and compassion. The legend of the baker and the prince traveled far beyond the forest, told in poems, ballads, and bedtime stories. But to those who lived near enough to see it firsthand, it was never just a story. It was real. It was theirs. After their wedding beneath the oaks, Mira and a lion began something neither throne nor crown could contain. They didn't return to the palace, nor did they seek to replace it. Instead, they began anew. With help from forest creatures and villagers alike, they built a sanctuary just beyond the edge of the enchanted woods, a wide expanse of orchard, garden, and glimmering halls made of glass and cedar. They called it the Whispering Kingdom, not because it was ruled, but because it listened. Here, the sick came to heal. The lost came to find purpose. Animals and people shared tables, and no voice was too small to be heard. Mira led with flower-dusted hands, while a lion walked beside her, not as ruler, but as partner, protector, and ever-curious student of her ways. Children were taught to speak gently to birds, and to never ignore the twitch of a rabbit's nose. They learned that sometimes magic was simply giving someone a warm roll and a place to sit. And every week, Mira hosted what became known as the Kindness Kitchen, open to all, run with joy, and serving pastries enchanted not with spells, but stories. Lucio, now grayer around the muzzle, but no less opinionated, remained the unofficial advisor of the realm. He often perched atop a shelf, casting judgment over burnt scones, or flirting shamelessly with passing tabby cats. Lady Noctra, too, stayed. She took up residence in a small stone cottage surrounded by moonflowers, and slowly, tentatively, became a teacher. Her sharpness dulled into wisdom, her loneliness into mentorship. She brewed teas that calmed nightmares and taught children to read the wind. Sometimes, she would appear in Mira's bakery at twilight, sharing quiet stories over slices of lemon cake. One spring, a young traveler arrived, nervous and thin, with more questions than hope. Mira gave them a seat and a scone. A lion offered to show them the orchard. And by summer's end, the traveler smiled easily and called the place home. This happened many times. And so, the Whispering Kingdom flourished, not in walls or armies, but in warmth and welcome. It became a sanctuary where courage meant kindness, and leadership looked like lifting others. But Mira never stopped baking. Every morning, she rose before the sun. She tied her apron, stretched her fingers, and turned on the oven. Birds delivered fresh berries. Foxes carried sacks of flour. And sometimes, a lion would kiss her shoulder and steal a cooling bun before it was ready. As they aged, their love only deepened. They grew lines and laugh marks, but also roots into the land, into each other. They danced in the kitchen when no one was watching. They read by candlelight with Lucio curled at their feet. And when storms rolled in, they listened to the rain together, grateful for the roof, the fire, and the small miracles they had made with their own two hands. One night, as twilight bathed the bakery in violet and gold, Mira stood at the counter, shaping a batch of mooncakes. A lion leaned beside her, brushing flour from her nose. "Do you ever miss the castle?" he asked. She shook her head, smiling. "This is my castle. These walls. This flower. These stories." He nodded. "Then may it stand forever." And perhaps it did. Perhaps the Whispering Oven still stands, at the edge of a forest where magic and kindness still walk hand in hand. Perhaps a black cat lounges in the sun, and somewhere, a baker hums to herself while the oven glows. And perhaps, just beyond the window, a fox watches her with love still blooming in his eyes.